segue.
This is in fact the L5R stream.
This is in fact the L5R stream. And hey, what's up everyone, and welcome back to Asians Read, the stream for tabletop gaming enthusiasts who want to learn more about Asian cultures and make their games more inclusive. How was that? I think that was a good intro.
That was good.
I just made that up.
It's a good soundbite, yeah.
Good
You put on your
soundbite.
radio voice.
Yeah. Welcome back everyone. I feel like a little bit of laughter was necessary and a trip down memory lane was necessary because we're gonna be reading a really tough section of the book. Content warning for everyone. There's going to be talk about ableism and mental health in this episode. It's going to be tough because we're talking about disadvantages. And Sar, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did some reading ahead. But when you are making a character in L5R, you have to give them advantages and disadvantages to kind of create more depth for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of it is how a lot of it is going to be how the GM handles it as well as how the player is going to handle it. But there's just some like you've already mentioned before, there are just some stuff in here that's just problematic no matter what.
Yeah.
I said this on our first stream covering advantages, disadvantages, and passions and adversities and whatnot. But my take on these, and I have a mixed take on them, I see why they were put in here because I feel like these are, they really can turn into just outright fluff, but they are mechanics that can be used to help, for example, a newbie to this game develop that very intricate backstory that they might have put to paper but might not be sure how to enact in the game. Potentially, these things can give the GM a way to introduce flavors from that backstory into the game. However, this system is not perfect, and there is a lot of ableism in here, and there is a lot of labeling, a disability as a disadvantage, which we're going to get into. And so I see why this stuff is in the book, and I see why it's part of the game, but we still can do better.
Yeah, we've been talking pretty much all day on our private Discord chat about how we would approach this, and I mean, Jeremy, you mentioned that this would be like an episode where we talk about like Asian stuff because there's certainly, unlike the last one, which was purely game design, I think there are parts of this that will be about Asian cultures and depictions of Asians and perceived homogeneity in Asia, which is something that I want to touch on, especially when we get to the Gaijin one. And I know that Adam Ali, who I already see is in our chat, is just gonna. I should have invited Adam Ali actually to talk about this particular one, but next time. But we're gonna be talking about Asian stuff. We're gonna be talking about game design stuff, because the idea of advantages and disadvantages, well, interesting. I think it's a great idea for players to think about their characters' strengths and weaknesses in game. And I think that's a really good way of giving your character some realism. But when they're enforceable, when the GM can enforce them, it becomes a little bit more problematic. I actually want to preface this by talking about another game that might provide us with a bit of a point of comparison. There's a game called End of the World. It's a line of games. There's like End of the World,
I played 'em.
Robotic Uprising, End of the World, Zombie Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And I played the Zombie Apocalypse one, and I had like a game.
Same.
It was really great. We played as ourselves. The game is all about playing as yourself. And when you actually create your characters at the very beginning, you assign your own stats. And you give yourselves advantages and disadvantages, literally. But you as a player get to choose what you include. And at the end of character creation, everybody talks about it. Like, hey, you gave yourself a really low, what the equivalent to intelligence is. I really think that you're quite clever. You should actually increase that. Or like, hey, you included this disadvantage. Are you comfortable including that? And it actually gets you to have a conversation about the strengths and weaknesses that you attribute to yourself and the fictional version of yourself that you're making. It doesn't say like, for me, I have ADHD and I have OCD. I'm not compelled to put those into my game. I don't have to put those into the fictional version of me. And I really like that game for that. It lets you play as yourself, and it lets you be your most awesome self in a game where the world is ending.
That's the reason I chose to play that one a few times with this meetup group that I'm in, because I wanted to play myself and play around with, my anxieties and certain things that I would like to translate to my character sheet. And it was interesting to see, this group of people around the table get very honest about certain facets of their personality, and then see how that translated over into a scenario where we were trying to escape from the zombie apocalypse in New York City.
I had a map of Toronto, and we were like drawing on
same,
it and
same,
labeling
yeah,
it.
same
It
thing.
was so much fun to do. But the game itself is very rules light, like super rules light, whereas like L5R in comparison is very crunchy. So one of the things I want us all to think about from a game design perspective, especially you, Emma, since you don't play TTRPGs, is how, having strengths and weaknesses, advantages and disadvantages are great in a game, but when surrounded by rules can become increasingly problematic. And I think that's a lot of the problems with L5R, especially with honor. I was going to say honor and glory, but primarily honor, is that there are so many hard and fast rules around these problematic tropes that you can't easily edit them out of your game. So that's what I want us to think about when we're approaching advantages and disadvantages. And same for you, audience, if you're following along. I noticed that a couple of you already have your books open. So let's get into it. I just wanted to go over the fact that each character has advantages and disadvantages. We talked about advantages before, and we're going to scroll down to disadvantages. Disadvantages start on page, where is it? Here we go. Page 116. I don't know if Steve wants to say anything about the mask. It's
like
very
the one
intricate.
I made?
No, there's a mask on page 116 of the
Gotcha.
PDF.
Sorry, I was way back when you were talking about the original descriptions of.
No worries. Sorry, is this a Scorpion Clan character? Because they have a cherry blossom tree on their fan.
That is a Scorpion Clan character. That is a card by the name of Fawning Diplomat.
Interesting.
I really like this mask. I think it's dope. This mask looks like it is maybe lace, which would probably be adhered basically by really light glue, right? Like you could peel it off kind of like a sticker, like it wouldn't be that bad. Or it's maybe like a heavier material, and it has the illusion, like the white spaces are actually just like skin tone. So it's custom made, so you can just apply it and it would still be comfortable. Number one thing I like about it, clearly the mask is supposed to be kind of like a flirty, kind of like mysterious, but not too mysterious. Not like a Batman mask. It's not a domino mask.
Yeah.
Right? Because the eye holes are really, really big, so you can see both their eyes and their eyebrows, which is how you go about making a masquerade mask where you need to actually be social.
Yeah, the question though is the name of the card and then the art as well. Fawning Diplomat. And I know that's a completely separate conversation and isn't quite in line with what we're talking about today. But I think FFG could have made a different word choice there.
Agreed.
Let's just put it at that. So I think we've all picked specific disadvantages that we want to talk about, and this series would last way longer if we read through each and every one of them. But some of them are very similar to one another, and then some I think are worth noting and worth discussing in greater detail from an Asian perspective, and others are just plain bad. Do we have any that we want to start with?
Well, can start with the first one.
We'll start with
Ben
Ten's
10's
curse.
And this is just my general note for any of the ones that are about a curse. So I see what they're doing here, but for the record, the fortunes don't curse you. They're called fortunes. You get their assistance through particular actions, or you don't. There isn't a curse or the opposite negative effect that is associated with them. And that's just a wording choice and me being picky, but yeah, the fortunes don't curse people.
Yeah. I mean, that's like is that like a cultural thing that people might not notice?
Uh, well, yeah. So I don't know how well known the seven fortunes are
I mean,
in
we
general.
talked about them at the beginning, but I think like before L5R, I didn't know about them at all.
Right. And the way they exist in Japan is different from China and
Hmm.
anywhere else similar uh, gods would have ended up. But yeah, they come from various places. And for the most part, they represent good things, like seven good qualities and
Mm-hmm.
nice things. And then asking for their aid is usually in things like, I don't know, um, oh boy, I'm blanking, but like good fortune in business or ventures and
Hmm.
other virtues of more abstract nature, but like they really are for all positive things.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's not like you piss them off or do something wrong and they're like, oh no,
Well,
negative effects for you.
well, I think this kind of goes into familiar sort of cultural
Mm-hmm.
experiences with gods or with a divine, right? We see it a lot like Greek mythology, and I know
Yeah.
our our mod Drew is in the chat. Like in Greek mythology, we see the gods really interfering, and not all of them, but many of the gods interfering with the lives of mortals in negative ways.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we take that assumption from that very, very well known example and then apply it across all cultures, and that's where you're kind of wrong. Same thing goes for China. A lot of the gods there like really don't interact with people directly.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
Yeah.
I had a similar tension because I mean, there's a lot to say about how in an East Asian culture how you view kind of these supernatural like forces. You don't really have this idea of like angels and demons like sitting on your shoulder, being like, this is what's good and this is what's wrong. It's less about that and more about your own personal morality and these things representing a lot of the beauty, the horror, the danger of the natural world around you. And here, I think we see a little bit of like that. Know that gods can also curse you if you like don't appease them, which is it straddles that line, but it definitely feels unlike other sections which we really enjoy, like we're not being seen, like
Mm-hmm.
the identity is not being seen.
mhm.
That sucks.
See, for me, it's about that. It's just, to me, this feels like a lack of understanding about East Asian cultures. In general, it's like, it's kind of like you're saying, like, it's almost like, to me, it feels like a devaluing of East Asian religion because, okay, saints don't curse anybody. You have clear delineation in Western religion about, you have saints and you have demons. You have angels and you have demons, right? Angels bless, demons curse. All of a sudden here we have this blending of a curse of somebody who can curse and bless, which again to me is like a lack of understanding of East Asian culture. That there is a division between entities that bless versus entities that curse.
Yeah, I think this is. I mean, this one alone, and it's not even. We're not even talking about Benten's curse in particular. We're just talking about the fact that these gods are cursing. That's what Emma brought
Mm-hmm.
up.
Yeah.
But we haven't even gotten to this disadvantage yet. Um, but I think this is like a classic example of well, Orientalism. Western power dynamics and Western ways of knowing the East. And like you said, Sarah, this is a very clear example of taking a Western understanding of how the supernatural and the divine interact with the mortal realm and imprinting that upon Asia, where it doesn't necessarily apply. It's the same thing, and we've talked about this with monsters. Same thing with applying, the idea of alignment in D&D and how monsters can be good, evil, neutral, lawful, and all that. And going into a country like China, where monsters in general are neutral entities and they act as animals would. They don't have these sort of the same morality as humanity does.
Mm-hmm.
But we take those Western understandings and we apply them to the East. And we assume that the East is like that. And that's where this harm comes from.
Yeah. And what I've said before about to someone not here, but said to people before about Japanese gods and creatures and all of that, is that morality is for the living people, not for the supernatural and the gods. And so a lot of stories in Japan where there are entities acting in particular ways, it's to highlight what the people are like, their characteristics, their actions, what they've done, not what the gods do or what the gods are like. So just, yeah, something to keep in mind if reading Japanese stuff, where like monsters show up. It's like, well, who is the monster?
I think about this a lot in the game that I keep talking about on this
Alpha
stream,
game.
Yokai Hunter Society. I just think about it a lot because almost every scenario I've imagined where the yokai are supposed to be, the creatures that your players go up against, there's been some sort of reversal in there where actually the humans are involved to a certain degree more than expected, and it's not so clear cut as the monsters are evil and must be exterminated. That could just be a fact that I like those sorts of twists in fiction. I like the whole idea of, The Witcher plays with this too. Is it the humans that are bad or the monsters that are bad? Blah, blah, blah. But I think it's always more interesting to present monsters as living ecological beings rather than just cannon fodder for players to destroy and feel powerful doing so.
Absolutely.
I'll go ahead and link in chat in our Discord in the resources channel a tweet thread by Legion, which is Shinto Nephilim on Twitter, on a Shintoist take on gods and how that kind of D&D just doesn't let you do that. I think it's very useful and a great extended reading for this conversation.
I mean, we even had an example of this, Steve. And you fell. I don't want to say you fell victim to this, but this happened to you when we were recording Dungeons and Asians. I was trying to portray a living, breathing, natural world, and you were like, "We might fight these things."
Yep. You were
How
like,
can we get advantage on them?
Well, I was
Exactly.
literally describing these beautiful birds, and I was like, "Why aren't they engaging?" And Steve was afterwards was like, "I was preparing for combat."
Yep.
I was like,
how?
I was
I don't
just
wanna
trying to
get flanked.
describe the birds. But yeah. Do we want to read Ben 10's curse, Emma, or did you just point out the idea of a curse?
Just the overall idea.
Cool.
I don't know. I have a lot of one-line questions for some of these things.
I will say specifically on Benton's curse, ignore some other connotations, the mechanics of it, which is your romantic efforts are stymied by circumstances and your gestures to get the romantic attention of others are usually misinterpreted. Hilarious.
That's hilarious. It could be done really well at your table if your group is connected. But it could also be done really poorly. But I don't think that's a flaw in the writing. I think that's just what you put this in here. Everything can be misinterpreted. I will say that.
Yeah.
You as creators, I know there are many creators who are in our audience. If you are writing, no matter what you do, people are going to take your game and twist it beyond what you think it should be. It happens all the time. But what you have to do is take the effort to put mechanisms in place to ensure that people who read your book, play your game, have the tools needed to actually play it ethically. That's why including safety tools and all that stuff is here. People can disregard them, but you've done your due diligence to put them in there to ensure that people understand this. So yeah, something like this is I think that could be hilarious, but I also think that could be a bad GM can use that to do a lot of harm to a player who wants to maybe have a tragic romance in their story and just turn it into a comedy, and not in the Greek sense.
Yeah.
There is a blue text bar, but we've already skipped. But it is a paragraph. It's less than a paragraph.
Where is it?
That says, I have to go and scroll for it. But it basically outlines how romance can be. It doesn't say this specifically. Can be a line for many tables, and it specifically says players might not be comfortable with romance in their game, the GM included. And I think that's worthwhile highlighting, as that's a very positive thing and very helpful thing to push towards safety and inclusivity. So the game is the designers are at least aware of the harm something like this could potentially create. So kudos to that. I think they could do more, but that's besides the point.
Yeah. And then every single one of these disadvantages also has something mechanical. So for Ben 10's curse, when you make a check to express your admiration to someone, such as an aesthetics air check to find the right poem to read to express your feelings, or a courtesy air check to tell someone your feelings without exceeding propriety, you must choose and reroll 2 dice containing, and I always forget the symbols. Sorry.
Let's
Success or
success
explosive
or
success.
explosive success.
Oh, okay. After resolving the check, if you failed, you gain 1 void point. A couple things that I think that are interesting about it from a design perspective. Those are 2 things that I would never ask a player to roll for. That's my personal take as a GM. So something like this, if a player took this curse, this mechanic might never show up in my game. Like we did an entire romance episode of Dungeons and Asians, and there were 4 of us at the table, but really only 2 of us were talking. Yep. Steve and Kiana were talking. There was no dice rolling, and Amar and I just held hands the whole time because we were like, "What's happening?"
I was like, "What's happening?" I was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
I think this is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Jeremy.
I think this points out to a problem we're going to encounter with a lot of the disadvantages and even advantages in this game. A lot of them are mechanically presented as kind of crunchy in the core rule book and presented as things that are not up to GM fiat, but in reality, they kind of are. And in reality, when you play a game like this, a lot of times these situations will not come up unless you as a player specifically insist that they come up. So once again, I can see kind of the tension here where maybe a new player might really want to stress a certain element of their character's personality or backstory, and this can potentially enable them to inject those feelings into the narrative. But trying to commodify all of these things in a list in a lengthy section of the book that specifically calls certain conditions disadvantages is where you get into the problems that a lot of us are seeing and sensing.
Yeah. And I mean, sorry, you said something very insightful in our Discord chat, and you said, if SAR was able to actually use these, I would have to keep it in a separate note on a separate sheet. But you don't have a sheet. So these things are either forgotten or require player agency to come into effect.
Exactly.
But you're de-incentivized to actually give yourself that disadvantage because it has a mechanical implication.
I'll admit, like, if I'm GMing, I should have a list of all my characters, all their ring stats, and all that other stuff with all their advantage and disadvantage. Half the time, I just have the character sheets in front of me, and I don't remember their advantages and disadvantages at all. And I think I will be hard pressed to find a GM that actually has a list of characters and their advantages and disadvantages for this game. Interesting. It's just something that even as a player that I don't think about unless it's something that is like a character that I intentionally put into the creation of my character.
It has to be intentional.
It has to be absolutely intentional.
It has to be very intentional, which is not something that's really laid out here. Here, it makes it seem as your character will have some quirks, which are actually quite arbitrary, but that's not that. I feel like that's the wrong way to tackle something like "quote unquote" advantages and disadvantages,
because
which should be called something else.
These are
should be called something else entirely.
Too. Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on. Is there So we've gone through the Ben 10s one, and we've talked. It's kind of served as a template on how we want to approach the rest of these. Just like, so between all of us, just call it out if there's one that we want to touch on.
So Bishman's Curse, I won't talk to specifically, but there's a lot to be said about the physical prowess and physical ability of people, which we'll get into in some more examples that are much more emblematic of the harm that it can cause. But Bishman's Curse, that's something you can like put on the back burner for us to talk about indirectly. But what I would like to talk about is the one directly after that, which is the Bitter Betrothal. And I would like to actually pair that up with, I'll read it out loud, but I will pair that up with an advantaged, which is called Blessed Betrothal, which will be on page 104. But let's read page 117 first, because we're already there.
So we don't need to read the flavor text for the sake of time, unless the flavor text is something you'd like to talk about. Do we want to focus on the effects, or?
I'm going to read this one out loud.
Cool.
I'm going to read this one.
I haven't read this one, so that's why I ask.
So this is a water disadvantage. My husband returns tonight. She said in a low whisper, passing the bag of coins beneath the table to the men seated across from her. Nobody in this inn knew her face, yet she still felt the need for caution. He'll be traveling via the eastern road. It shall be done, said the leader. Without further word, he and his companions rose from the table and left the inn. The room seemed somehow lighter without them in it. Soon she would be rid of him. So this is a disadvantage, which says there's something that complicates your relationship with your betrothed or your spouse. As a result, they often undermine your efforts, with, whether out of malice, negligence, or incompatible set of goals. So this is a betrothal. So these are two people who have been agreed to be married.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this idea that it's framed as almost like a violent, unnecessary, horrible, malicious kind of thing. Yes, there are a lot of arranged marriages that can, be highly tense, but arranged marriages are a big part of some East Asian cultures and other Asian cultures as well. I know there are arranged marriages in my family, and there's a lot of tension around speaking about them and talking about them. And the fact that this is shown as basically two extremes, this and the blessed betrothal, which I think is worthwhile talking about so we can compare and contrast, unless anyone has a burning desire to talk about that specific text right there.
I have some stuff, actually.
Sure, yeah.
We haven't even talked about the second one yet, but I think the one thing with this one is if you as a GM want to set a certain... If you want to portray marriage in a certain way or conventional marriage in a certain way in L5R, or if this is a hard topic for you, right? Something that you really don't want to have to deal with, and you're at a con and a player takes this one. You're being forced to deal with it since it has mechanical implications. It further, this doesn't really help you create nuanced characters as they might think. If anything, you then have a PC who is constantly having to deal with their significant other, who is just supposedly terrible and awful. And it's just like, do you need to mechanize that? Do you need to put game mechanics on something like this? It's because essentially you've created a negative, like the D&D equivalent of a feat that gives you a partner who's trying to undermine you because you are with them against their will. And that says things about your character too, for having agreed to something like that, or your character's family, which we all know has very strong implications in the game, being okay with something like that. And it talks about the agency of your partner. In this case, the agency of women in this game. And immediately with this text, you create a villain because you know that these mercenaries who she's hired are trying to kill the player character. Right?
But also that's we're not talking about undermining. If it's hey, go kill my
husband. Yeah. So this is an extreme. This is an extreme. Yeah.
I've noticed that with a bunch of them is that the flavor adds a particular tone that the description doesn't have.
There's a disconnect.
And so you're what is happening?
It feels a lot like the certain D&D Wizards of the Coast official modules have secrets, like Rime of the Frost Maiden has them, secrets that you're encouraged to give to your characters that are basically along these lines. Like you might have a bitter betrothal and maybe you'll have to deal with your spouse at some point, but they're all optional. And there are no mechanics attached to them. They're just basically fluff lines that you can use to inject into the narrative if you so desire.
Yeah, it's odd because how do you play through that? How do you play through that scenario if you're the player and your GM decides, well, this is what's going to happen, and the bandits come, the mercenaries come, and they attack you, and you take them out because you got some cool ability, and you interrogate one of them. You're like, who sent you? They said, you're your wife, and you have to play through that at your table.
I think this is meant to be one of those things where most RPG books will say, work with your GM to come up with some kind of scenario.
But the book doesn't say that.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
They should.
That's
They
the
should.
problem with putting all this flavor text here.
Yeah.
It's just making your book longer. Like this is fluff. It's unnecessary fluff.
Look, as an old time L5R fan, the flavor text is appreciated. It's fan service. It's total 100% fan service. I as a fan appreciate it, but I agree it's complete fluff.
And then,
go ahead.
like, I would appreciate it too if it actually represented what's being described a little better, because like I like a little story to break up the rules.
So here's what I'll say about flavor text and something good about D&D, having worked internally at Wizards. I wrote for them a couple times, and I wrote some flavor text, and my editor, Chris Perkins, emailed me and was like, hey, you need to change your flavor text, and here's why. He said, you need to change your flavor text because it assumes that the party or the players are interacting with the story in a very specific way. And if your flavor text is too specific, you are telling the GM, you're communicating to the GM that the story must be told in only one way.
Okay.
And so that made me really, really analyze flavor text whenever I see it moving forward. So that's why I really don't like this one. It should also be said, speaking of writing, Monty's not here with us. There's a big empty space.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
But
our writer's not here.
our writer's not here. Monty's not here, but Monty is doing something even more important than this. Monty is literally making L5R better by writing L5R, a literal L5R assignment. We don't know what it is, and Monty can't tell us, but Monty is missing this because he is SAR.
Monty is fighting the good fight.
Monty is fighting the good
Monty
fight.
has deadlines.
And has deadlines for Fantasy Flight games and is writing more L5R stuff.
Monty, if you're watching this right now, finish your last minute.
Turn off the stream. Turn off the stream, Monty. Don't watch this.
I will say that some of my favorite Monty moments are when he says nothing, but I see in his eyes that he's like, what
like,
can
I
I
know
say
something.
that doesn't give away or break my NDA?
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, oh, I love that.
It's the R
Monty's in the
cross
chat.
and the I up.
Oh, Monty's in the chat.
That said, Daniel, I think that anecdote from Chris Perkins is great because I'm going to go read the Blissful Betrothal, and I think we'll be able to connect some dots here. So Blissful Betrothal actually starts with a poem instead. Autumn nights, it seems, are long by repute alone. Scarcely had we met when morning's first light appeared, leaving everything unsaid. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. The next piece, though. Your spouse fulfills certain social duties in your name when you are absent, such as attending events or caring for family members, provides assistance in areas of expertise, and offers counsel when you face difficult decisions. Cool. And then there's some mechanical stuff where they can help you if they're involved in certain checks.
I like that a lot better.
Mm-hmm. So like when you compare them, you kind of have like this blissful betrothal. I like that it had extra text around other things they might do besides attending parties and just telling people that you're great. That's always nice. But I did feel it was missing a little bit of the tension that even a blissful, a happy, a very harmonious relationship can have. Erased that portion of it. But that is kind of like the A++ S tier, what I would like to see.
S-tier.
This is more like, it's a good advantage. It's good. The bitter betrothal though is in not equal parts awful to the player.
So the blessed betrothal is something that I wish kind of was presented as an option in, for example, D&D, where I'm wrapping up a campaign where I happen to be playing a character that does have a wife that he occasionally communicates with via like message spells, and she's like helping him with certain things, and he relies upon her for emotional support. And the GM is not very good at elaborating upon the threads that I've given him about my character's wife, and she's often forgotten. And when I try to inject her into the narrative again, it's sometimes tricky, and I kind of wish there was a mechanical thing in there that let me do that. So that instance is something, an example of me appreciating this L5R arrangement of advantages and disadvantages, mostly advantages in this case.
Mostly advantages.
Mostly advantages, yeah.
So if I can offer a way to make bitter betrothal somewhat relatively acceptable within the L5R rule, if you are going to use this as a GM or a player, if the player has this as a disadvantage, this is how I would recommend you handle it, right? Have the spouse come from an opposing clan, or like in the case of like lion and unicorn, there is absolute case now for people that are lion and unicorn mixed, are lion and unicorn, and they marry. That, well, there's an actual reason why they would be at odds with each other now, and to the point where they would be fighting on opposite side of the war.
If enough, this is unrelated, I'm sorry, but if enough unicorn and lion intermarry, do we get like a manticore family?
I don't know for sure, but I'm going to say 100% yes.
Yes,
canon,
yes.
canon.
Monty.
Manticore family.
That, right?
So I will say something here. Like, sorry, you've just said something really interesting that I don't know if this is an actual disadvantage, but one that I think would be better than bitter betrothal. I really like the idea of your families not liking each other.
Mm-hmm. Your clan's not liking each other.
Your clan's not liking each other. And I think that is more... It's more in line with what they've already established in this L5R world, so it's not far-fetched for that to happen. But it also doesn't immediately affect that character's personal relationships, or force the GM to be directly antagonistic towards that player. However, there are still mechanical implications, and if you try to do things politically, well, certainly your family's tensions will come into play here, as they do in the real world. That's a real disadvantage. Maybe it'll come up. I don't know. I haven't read ahead.
That was codified into the rules. It would also help newbie players keep track of the lore, like which clan has trouble with which other clan, which is all stuff that is not presented in this book. And we wouldn't know half of those connections if Sarah were not here with us on the stream.
That is true, yeah. I do like the imagery that you gave me of like Romeo and Juliet for a bitter betrothal. Or for those who grew up in the 90s, Romeo Must Die with Jet Li.
Or
DMX, Jet Li and DMX.
DMX was in there.
DMX, yeah. Or like
DMX
Romeo
made like 3
X
movies with
Juliet.
Jet Li.
Yeah, he did.
I have stuff to say about that movie, but that's later. Neither here nor there.
Anyways, I think we can move
Great
on.
movie.
Yeah.
We should watch that movie. Anyways,
Yeah.
sorry.
Speaking of old movies, the blackmailed by the first line, "I know your misdeeds," made me think of "I Know What You Did Last Summer." And that gave me like a little laugh, but then I had nothing really to say about the rest of it.
I will offer that I also feel that sometimes the authors, I think, are putting in like pop culture references, but they're not obvious enough for me to know if 100% it's there, but I enjoy them. So it is what it is. Let's keep moving on. The next one is blindness. And we had already upfront talked about a little bit of the ableism here. And Daniel, I know you had already talked about some of the problems you already immediately had with the blindness. Would you be okay reading it, or would you like?
Yeah, totally. This one is also like a thing that I deal with at work too.
Okay.
Because one of my coworkers is blind or has low vision. So it's something that we all deal with at work. There are a lot of people who are like, "Did you see that? Look over here." These sorts of things, come into play when you're interacting with other people, especially remotely. But anyways, I'll read blindness. Though Moika could not see the faces of Shosuro's guests, she could tell by their voices whether or not they had been truly invited. It was a perfect arrangement for the spy master. Type physical scar. And they don't really outline what these types mean. I looked back to see and I couldn't find anything.
They don't.
So the implications of physical and scar are also very interesting here. Effects. You are unable to see out of either eye. Your lack of sight does not mean you cannot perceive your surroundings using your other senses, but you cannot observe things that can be perceived only by sight. When you make a check for which sight is an asset but cannot easily be replaced by other senses, such as sentiment, to identify someone's hostile intentions from across a noisy room, or a martial arts check to hit a moving target with an arrow, you must choose and reroll 2 dice containing success or explosive success. After resolving the check, if you failed, you gain 1 void point. So we talked about this one as well, because I took issue with it, because it immediately says that you cannot see out of either eye. And so that means that if you, and they say scar too. So if in battle you sustained a wound to your face and you lost an eye, you wouldn't even qualify for blindness.
Correct.
There is, I mean, a lot of people, and if you don't know this in the audience, that's totally okay. But if you don't know this, people who are blind or have low vision can many of them can still see.
Blind is often a legal definition.
It's also a legal definition.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is legally blind, and he wears glasses and he can see. So what I take issue with this is that it takes all the nuance out of blindness, and just says you can't see out of both eyes. They've somehow said that this is related to this is a scar type. So this can be inflicted upon a player, but it must be both eyes. Yeah. There's just it struck me. It hit really weird for me because it takes all the nuance out of blindness, and I really don't like that, because this is something that a lot of people, this is a part of their life. A friend of mine, one of my coworkers, is blind, and she does everything I do with no issue. And I know that technology really helps. But when you tell a player that they can't do something because of a disability, we go into the realm of ableism here in TTRPGs, and it's something that we see so much. We are encouraged by these games to make assumptions that disabled people need fixing, or that this is a problem.
Something to overcome.
Something, it's a you need to overcome it. It's a challenge.
Right.
And it leads you into the realm of stereotypes. Immediately with the flavor text, you have a character whose job it is to sense people's intentions because of this thing. Also, they say you can't. They have very specific examples, like you can't shoot a bow. Okay.
Why would you be?
Why would you be?
Okay.
You would find
I gotta step in because here's the thing. Blindness makes absolute no sense as a disadvantage in L5R. It makes 0 sense. Every single blind character.
Zatuichi, an iconic character.
Every single blind character, quote unquote blind character. By the way, the only one blind character that I know of was the Phoenix Clan champion Shiba Tsukimi, who was blinded because her scorpion duelist used poison on her sword and blinded her. But she had supernatural sight. Every single blind character in L5R has had supernatural sight. There is no reason for blindness to be a disadvantage in L5R.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the note that I made. It's like, well, based on the flavor, it sounds like they're doing just fine, if not better in some situations. So this is where that go ahead.
Sorry. This is number 2 for me, because this ear right here, this ear is deaf. This ear cannot hear sound at all. And legally this ear is deaf. But guess what? This ear can still hear. I can still hear everyone perfectly.
Yeah.
So I was, as I was reading these, I was comparing them to how another mainstream role-playing game tackles things like blindness and deafness. And I happened to have finished reading through the Game Master section of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rulebook. And there's just a very short section on characters with disabilities, but there's some interesting differences where they do have a tiny blurb for blindness and deafness, but then they say that conditions such as, being blinded or deafened with these mechanics, they aren't a good fit for a character who has already been living with these disabilities long term. And then for blindness specifically, they have usual things like you can't detect using vision, you can't do perception checks requiring sight, blah, blah, blah. But you might get a feat called blind fight, which is basically says you have instincts like Daredevil and you don't need to rely on vision at all. And then it says at the end, spectacles or other corrective devices might reduce or remove any of these mechanics. And they also say blindness or impaired vision. For deafness, it's deafness or being hard of hearing, which I personally appreciate. And that's just a small comparison between L5R and another mainstream role-playing game, but I think kind of the little differences in word choice there made a difference to me as I was reading and comparing and contrasting.
Yeah. And then this is the first time too that I was like, okay, well, the boundary between this concept of an advantage and a disadvantage is really non-existent for a lot of these. So this is where kind of putting them into two sections with big titles is like, you can say as many times as you want that you can turn your disadvantages and back and forth. It's contextual, but like you've organized them into positives and negatives. Well, that's kind of telling people what they can and should be doing with this, rather than listing like qualities and characteristics or conditions of your character. You're saying like, here are your disadvantages. Okay.
I mean, are there alternate words they could have used aside from disadvantage or advantage? Because I feel like we keep coming back to that. Would it have been better if they had included a section simply labeled, disabilities, if you wish to play a disabled character? I mean, what are your takes on that?
But having a wife who wants to murder you is not a disability.
That's true.
No, it's not. Yeah. But to be fair, advantages covers two specific traits. It does cover adversities as well as anxieties. So those two things do fall under the disadvantage section, whereas passions and I can't remember what the other term is for passion and what can I say? I'm flipping and distinctions. Passions and distinctions are considered to be advantages.
So would it have been better if they had simply headlined all of this as like passion / distinction / anxieties and just included it as its own thing? Because I feel like those words, advantages and disadvantages, are trigger words.
Yeah, I think so.
At least for me.
I think you're right. I think if they went outside of advantages and disadvantages, because let's face it, advantages and disadvantages now also carries a lot of weight in the real world as well. I think that would have fixed a whole lot of things, a whole lot of harm.
Because I think we're like this. The L5R rule book, it automatically puts things in like a good column and a bad column, or at least this column is going to give you a negative impact when you are actually playing this game, whereas this column is going to give you buffs. And I think immediately drawing that fierce distinction, that's it's like alignment. Like things are not that black and white. Things are very gray.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, this is why I like the end of the world system, where you just get to decide what your strength and weakness is.
I'll also say that I specifically don't feel comfortable commenting on that piece, but if I was someone who was a creative director of L5R, advantages and disadvantages, I would probably run by a sensitivity reader because of the ableism and the disabilities that we're talking about here. And they can likely guide me in a way that's a lot more helpful rather than just kind of relying on my own introspection here. Sometimes you just kind of need that outside source who has that lived experience.
Here, FFG, I have a really easy fix for your system right now. You remove all of this really specific bullshit, and you tell the players that they get to decide however many disadvantages they want. It could be whatever they want. And the player must talk to the GM about two very, very broad categories of skill check that just results in them having to reroll successes and explosive successes, because it's the same mechanical effect for each one.
Yeah.
You have to choose and reroll 2 dice, and after resolve, if you fail, you gain a void point.
Yeah.
You take that little bit there, tell the player to have a conversation with their table and their GM, pick 2 skills. So, for instance, in blindness, they put like when sight cannot be easily replaced, or when you're just say that, or pick 2 skills or whatever, and just apply this to that. So you could choose what is a disadvantage to you. Literally, I could be like, yo, I'm too buff. I can't fit through doors. I'm not good at sneaking, or whatever. I could see that as a disadvantage. Or like, hey, look, I'm real strong. That's an advantage to me. Like, you want to get the player to think about their characters, own their characters, own their character's strengths and weaknesses. But you also can't assume that a character's disability is a disadvantage for them if they've grown up with it, if they've lived with it.
Yeah.
And that's where this really sucks, because this is written from the perspective of this is just so out of touch.
Could I share the story of my first D&D character that I ever made and my struggle to kind of inject some of this, basically trying to represent a disabled character in a game? So the very first D&D character I ever made was basically a ranger who was suffering from PTSD. Trigger warning, I will talk briefly about PTSD, and I will also talk about tinnitus, the ear condition. So just to let you guys know. The first character I made was a ranger who had like fought in some kind of undead war and basically been heavily injured and was recovering from his injuries. And so he had a certain degree of PTSD. And also he had been near some explosions, and shrapnel had affected his hearing. And so he suffered from tinnitus, which is in the condition where you can never really hear silence. You always hear like a beeping in the back of your head, which is something I suffer from. And I wanted to create a character that was dealing with these issues because it was something I was dealing with. And I talked to my GM about it at the time, who was a great GM, and he really liked the idea of me having a character that dealt with these issues. And he came up with, giving me like a minor magical spell where, like, when my character went to sleep at night, he would have like a little kind of orb of water circling near his head to give him white noise so he could easily fall asleep at night. And so that was me kind of collaborating with the GM. Now, I would have, a part of me likes this effort by L5R to introduce rolling mechanics to kind of exemplify those facets of the character that I created, because D&D doesn't really have those. And so it was all up to the GM to kind of provide that for me and for me to bring it out during my role playing. And I found that the other players at the table, they didn't really take these things that I put into my very lengthy character backstory seriously. To them, I was like, oh, he's playing like Rambo or something like that. Like, that was how they reduced kind of all these things I wanted to represent, because that's just, I guess that's just how, how it came across in their mind. So I feel like on the one hand, having something like this advantage disadvantage system that L5R has would have allowed the legitimacy of the facets of my character to really come out in the table through those roles. However, I definitely object to calling things, these elements of the character advantages and disadvantages, because for my ranger character, his hearing condition and his PTSD was not really an advantage or a disadvantage. It was something that happened to him. It was a lived experience that he was now living with and dealing with like anyone else. And that's ultimately what I wanted to evoke in my role playing. And that's ultimately what I wanted to evoke by choosing a character like this to play as. So I think a great way to combine all of this together is exactly what you said, Daniel. Come up with a system that encourages you to talk with your GM and come up with like 2 major skill checks that will further these elements of your character and just build that into the game mechanics. Yeah, that eliminates so much of this hassle that we're going through right now.
And I think that's the answer to one of the questions. Andreas, who's a friend of the podcast, said if it's not a stat or mechanic, lots of people won't engage or don't see the point, sadly, which is absolutely true, which is why I think my solution to this is literally allow you to mechanically create your own advantages and disadvantages, or disadvantages. The advantages seem all right. But if you're going to do it for both of them, you might as well pick an advantage. Like, for instance, I saw it in the chat a while ago. Somebody mentioned Toph from Avatar, who is a blind character and can do everything and more. Right? Literally created metal bending in Avatar.
That's not exactly true though, because Toph can't read. like Toph can't read like normal written text.
Oh, that's true.
Toph gets very afraid when Toph is suspended in the air and is on Appa. They did a lot to
because
talk
Toph
about.
can't use.
Toph can
senses.
only feel Appa and feel the air rushing past her.
I haven't
So-
watched Avatar in a really long time.
Perfectly fine. These are very small moments,
Mhm.
but these are small important moments,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the small important moments that we actually spend our Fridays talking about.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but Daniel, sorry to
But the
interrupt.
point I was
just
trying to
thought-
make is that Toph developed metal bending, which is literally not a disadvantage. But you won't see something like this in L5R. The L5R doesn't allow you to take something like blindness and turn it into an advantage. It only sees something like this as a disadvantage so
Except
far.
the flavor text kind of suggests
Except
that.
the but the flavor text again doesn't. It clashes with the rules. Sar?
So I mentioned in chat earlier that whenever somebody takes a disadvantage with like lost arm, lost hand, or missing limbs, or missing finger, lost legs, stuff like that, I don't know if anyone has ever played Soul Calibur or Tekken,
Yes.
Yeah.
but there's a character called Yoshimitsu.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I do what I call the Yoshimitsu effect. You want a lost arm? You wrote your character with a lost arm. Awesome. Okay. Well, the Caillou inventors created this engineered this arm for you, that which your lord bought for you. It has a special effect. Yes, it does. It's a little glitchy. Fine. Okay. Fine. We'll can say that it's a little glitchy. However, it does have this effect. You wind it enough, and you can do power hit, because guess what? Yoshimitsu can do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
100% true. But there's I can't believe I'm saying this. There's more nuance to Soul Calibur than there is L5R.
Yeah.
I mean, I think here,
Right.
I don't think the missing limbs entry here includes for anything like prosthetics. Or,
leg
or like
does.
wooden. The leg does.
The
Okay.
leg does.
It doesn't in the mechanic, but it does in the flavor text. So this is where that clash
Yes.
happens again. They're like, oh, the crab developed this, but then the description's just like, you gotta use a cane and you take forever to go everywhere. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, except there's these advanced prosthetics developed.
Because look at the discourse in the RPG community now around the wheelchair for
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, like
Mhm.
wheelchair combat, and just going back to once again Pathfinder 2, where it talks about missing limbs. Usually, if you're missing a foot and leg, a player can typically acquire a prosthetic to compensate. If they have no legs, they might use a wheelchair, a dependable mount, or levitation or flight magic. You don't have any of that in L5R, even though L5R can technically cover a lot of that same ground. And I think it's something we should start seeing in more role-playing games, especially ones published, within the last 2-3 years.
On the note of the leg thing as well, if any of you have ever watched or read Full Metal Alchemist, the Silver
Yeah.
Alchemist has peg legs and moves incredibly fast and well. So I don't
I think because we're talking about the other disadvantage we'll see later on, let's keep moving forward here. I know we were going alphabetically here, and we're on the letter B.
Yeah, we're on beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, I
I
did say that this might take forever.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to jump ahead to?
I kind of want
I
to jump
wanna-
ahead to the elephant in the room, the guide's
Yeah.
name.
Oh no,
culture,
I
appearance,
think we
but-
should talk about there's
Yeah.
two that I think we should talk about: bluntness very quickly and cognitive lapses.
I would, yeah. Two of them.
I want to talk
yeah.
about those because bluntness, for one, as somebody who works with people who are on the spectrum, bluntness is honestly, I think, terrible. I think it's terrible because it assumes that it says not having a certain neurotypical social skills is a disadvantage. And I really dislike that. And that's all that needs to be said about this one.
Hard
It's
agree.
just bad.
Yeah.
Hard agree.
I just cut that
yeah.
one out.
It's coded pretty hard and doesn't take into consideration any neurodiversity or differences in language, differences in
Right.
sense of humor. It also overemphasizes this need to be sneaky and underhanded and subtle in this not Japan culture, where it's like, you know what? Directness is very much appreciated
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm on the spectrum. I'm Asper. I have what you would call Asperger's.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything about the way we interact, the way other
Exactly.
people should perceive you. Do you consider it
How-
a disadvantage?
No, I consider it a superpower.
Yeah. Again, my OCD and my ADHD are very much advantages to me, and they're the reason. Honestly, they're the reason why Asians Represent exists.
Interesting thing is, I've had to go to therapy to help me come to terms with my OCD and my anxiety. And a big thing is that, I was encouraged to look at it as not that there was something wrong with me or that I was, somehow flawed or that I was thinking about things the wrong way. I was encouraged to think of it as almost a gift, or at least certainly an ability to see things in an unorthodox manner. And then, why am I seeing things in such an unorthodox manner? Where does that come from deep inside of me? How can I use this facet of, my mind to better understand the person that I am?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a nuance that is not represented in this current array of things we're looking at in L5R.
I'll also add that as someone who identifies as neurotypical and basically like able-bodied, even the flavor text here cuts both ways and does harm to both people who are neurotypical and atypical, because saying you look terrible, my lord, can be an absolutely nuanced thing to say with a lot of social weight and thought and other stuff put into it. There's no other text here, but let me tell you that, if I were to tell someone they look terrible, it is not something that it's not because I have difficulty expressing my emotions. It is quite the opposite. So this hurts everyone to just to erase all of the identity and nuance within this idea.
There is a really interesting chat going on in our Twitch chat right now about this thing, and nuance is so important. I mean, a member of our community mentioned that they're on the spectrum too, and said that the big disadvantage, a lot of the disadvantages, don't come from you. They are imposed upon you by society. And that was mentioned in the chat, and I think that's worth saying here. I will also say that this is something that we could spend an entire series talking about, an entire podcast talking about this specific issue. But I wanted to bring that up for bluntness, not to hold us up or prevent us from looking at other things, but I think we should continue on. Adam Ali, and I would be remiss if I didn't take Adam Ali's advice, said to read Cognitive Lapses and all of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to read it. There are cases of samurai who have suffered a killing blow to the head, yet recovered, who are changed by the experience. Some display all manner of odd behaviors, such as forgetting old skills or acquaintances, or dramatic shifts in taste and perception. Others lose themselves, suffering gaps in their memory, where the parts of themselves they've lost take control of their bodies. In very few of these instances is the culprit of an evil spirit who has slipped in through a wound or because of the Shadowlands taint. Still, one must be vigilant. Medicine by Agasha Shio. An odd detail to put in there. Mental scar. At the GM's discretion, you sometimes lose your ability to focus or think consciously. I have that. Okay. Your body continues to act during these times according to your general instincts, and it does not undertake actions you would not consciously perform. But you do not form coherent memories of these times. After you suffer such a lapse that lasts for more than a few brief moments, the GM's choice, you gain a void point. Oh, this one gives you can gain void points twice. When you make a check for which you must recall anything that happened during the period of cognitive lapse, such as a meditation void check to understand your past decisions or a sentiment check, blah, 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 you must choose and reroll two dice. The same thing.
The note that I had on this one was about how it's at the GM's discretion, like it's under their control.
Yeah.
I think it's there. I think it says that a lot throughout here. I think it's meant to be like you propose the idea and whether or not your GM decides.
This is the issue here.
It's unclear though.
The issue here is player agency.
And like, I kind of understand that this, is something that you wouldn't have control over as an individual, but it feels like something that can so easily be weaponized against one player at the table.
Yep.
And without conversation or warning or anything else, and it could make for a really bad time, man.
But again, a lot of the things that they describe here, the things that the person might actually engage in, that might affect the person, they kind of just say that this is from, again, a scar. Something happened to you that caused you to be like this. But again, it takes all the nuance out of the myriad of things that could be attributed to that, right? And honestly, this one doesn't need to be in here because this is literally a GM tool to fuck with players. Yeah, I mean, like, how do you role play that? It's like, I've decided to, I just don't understand.
You said it. It's a role play by the GM taking agency of your character.
It's dumb. Like, the only times this happens in the game is if, I'm playing on Roll20 with some friends and I'm shopping on Amazon and they were like, what just happened to your character? I don't know. But that has nothing to do with this disadvantage. I don't know. This is just offensive from a game design perspective.
Should say that's like ridiculous, not dumb.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just gonna throw that out there.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
But yeah,
this doesn't need to be here.
No.
I think there's something to be said about having the ability to write into your character the idea that some kind of trauma has led to maybe your character's inability to like recall certain memories or whatnot. But here they've kind of blurred the lines of like physical trauma, experiential trauma, and like born in just the way you are, right? Like your identity. It's all kind of packaged in here in about
in
3
one
paragraphs.
thing. Yeah.
Because like the note I had was that this is a physical it's caused by physicality here by the flavor text, even though the mechanical text doesn't say that. But basically says you get hit in the head real hard and you begin losing your memories. But memory loss and cognitive lapses, if I can use that term, is so complex that packaging it all under physical injury is it erases a lot of experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, like, this is also to say that like a physical blow can cause these. I mean, look at the entire First World War and how the government and the monarchy looked at shell shock, or as they now call it, war neurosis, right? There were no, in many cases, there were no physical wounds. People did not, they couldn't speak. Some of them couldn't walk. There were no wounds. But like in cognitive lapses, even the name of it, just like, it offends me from a design perspective because it's so poorly ambiguous. Like you said, Steve, like, is it a curse? Is it the taint? Is it a blow to the head?
There's like 5 different types of Shadowlands taint.
there's a lot of taint.
Yeah, there's a lot of
There
taint.
is. There's a lot
They
of
got
taint.
more taint than Starburst here. Like seriously.
Yeah. I'm just going to say this about cognitive lapse, and I know what they were going for. I know what character they're referencing, especially with the whole Shadowlands taint thing. I can't remember his exact name now, but they are referencing a specific character in L5R, which is Hida Kasada's brother, who every time he goes into battle, he will go into blood fury and into total blood fury that he does not recognize, that he will not remember what happens until he kills the last man standing, friend or foe. I know that's what they're going for here. They made references to that character here, but again, what pisses me off about this whole section is that it's just cognitive lapse should not have been what they called this. They should have called it battle blindness.
Yep. If they wanted something very specific.
That does come up later, though, as a different disadvantage or a thing, because I remember reading that. It's like, once you start, you can't stop, and everyone just backs up. So I forget what that's called, but it's several pages from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
I mean, I have the same sentiment for how they portray deafness as well. Damaged heart or organ is interesting. I think it's specific enough where like cognitive lapse is not specific.
Wait, where?
On the following page,
on
damaged
119.
heart or organ.
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Let's keep moving though.
FYI, one sentence. You know who has a famous damaged heart or organ in comic books? Tim Drake, the Robin.
I was also gonna say Iron
Really?
Man.
Really? What's
in
his
movies.
what's his damaged heart?
I didn't know Tim Drake was though.
His spleen had to be surgically removed because of damage, meaning he has to be very strict about what he eats, because like he's not allowed to drink alcohol.
Oh
and a lot
yeah,
of stuff.
in Red
I didn't
Robin.
know that.
It happened to Red Robin.
So
yes.
he has a permanent injury where his spleen had to be removed. Huge thanks, Yvonne, my partner, for educating me on that. But it's a big point in his like identity.
Until they rebooted Tim Drake.
Until they reboot him. But like the Teen Titans would go out for like drinks and stuff, and he couldn't partake in that because he has an injury that doesn't allow him to do that.
Is this like a new thing?
This is Teen
was-
Titans.
Like Teen Titans,
No,
like the comic?
I think he
No.
I think he got his spleen removed in the Red Robin series.
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe you're
Yeah,
right.
and it was like 2010, maybe like right before the New 52 reboot.
Yeah.
So like there probably was like a condensed period of time there where they're like, Tim's got his spleen removed. Tim's got his spleen removed.
Yes.
Yeah, and then
Suffice it to say, the reason I bring that up is because he represents someone who has like surgery that has lasting impressions, but he is still able-bodied. It's not necessarily something. It's not framed as something he had to overcome. It is simply part of his identity. And yeah, he can't eat a ton of red meat. It's okay.
Well, yeah. There's Iron Man in the movies. Like literally, he overcomes it.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's.
Just as a side, I've always seen Tim Drake as Asian for some reason. I don't know why.
Is it
but
the art?
I always have.
Because
I know that I forget his name. That dude, the actor, put out a video.
I know who you're talking about. I forget as well.
An Asian actor put out a video demonstrating himself as Tim Drake, but I've always seen Tim Drake as Asian. It's weird because sometimes artists draw him as looking really, really Asian.
there was a
Jeremy-
story arc where he looked super Asian to me, and I'm trying.
And his dad is very much an Asian dad.
God,
I have a lot to say about how the Robins being coded as people of color is way more interesting.
Yeah,
especially if you code Bruce Wayne as the white patriarch.
Yeah.
Anyways,
But
different
that's a
stream.
whole other thing.
Different stream.
Different stream.
That's gonna be our maybe we could talk about that when we watch Batman Ninja. Anyways, let's keep moving. Anything else before we do Gaijin name, culture, or appearance? Because I think we're gonna have to end on Gaijin name, culture, or appearance.
Let's just say, I'm just gonna say this. This would be considered. I would be considered foreign. Under Gaijin name, custom, and appearance, I would be considered foreigner. I would fall under that.
Before we get into that, there is fractured spine, alphabetically, that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Fractured spine, the first sentence of the text tells you exactly what they're going for. Moto stories tell of the famous Khan who rode a cart, Yasegi Khan. This is clearly someone who can't use their legs. They're paraplegic. Maybe they're quadriplegic. Spinal injuries take many forms. And they have again erased a lot of like this identity of this injury. Nothing more to say because we've covered a lot of this ground, and I'm good to move on to the Gaijin.
Yeah.
Cool.
I do got to say, though, for me personally, combining horses with spine injuries or anything of that sort, I can feel it because I have been thrown off of or bucked around on horses. I've bruised my tailbone. I've jarred my lower back. And this actually, when I read it, I feel it. And I would...
Let's skip it. Let's keep going.
Like, I would not want to have that in a game.
Yeah, and that's exactly why, safety tools are super important. Lines and veils are super important to do before you even make your characters.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing doesn't happen.
Yeah. And then before the Gaijin, we also have one that makes me kind of, I don't know, ranty, is the Fukuro Kujin's curse, where it takes you twice as long to gain a grasp of an academic field of study
Oh,
as it does another
I didn't
character.
even see this one.
I didn't see that one.
God.
And that one like set me off in my brain on like a rant and anger.
I feel personally attacked by that one.
Me too.
Like, not even as a joke, as like
it doesn't need to be in there.
I feel
that's not how learning works. Like this idea of like there being an average or a typical, and that somehow people are below that is just so enraging to me as an educator.
Yep.
And like I teach relatively complex stuff to people who are adults, like late teens, early 20s, sometimes into their 50s and 60s. So it's just like, we can't talk about learning and education in that way. No one is stupid. This is not a disadvantage. There's no such thing as an average or lesser. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it as somebody who got diagnosed with a learning difference as an adult, like I think I did pretty well for myself considering. I don't consider that at all a disadvantage.
Exactly.
It's more of a failing of the system itself interacting with an individual.
And also specific topics and whether you care or not. Some things just make sense to you and other things don't. You know, like one individual has multiple ways of seeing, understanding, and like just throwing random information and being like, did you pick it up in this amount of time? You're average. Like, that's not a thing. So this section made me, oops, I just hit my mic.
It's okay.
This section made me so angry.
I'm glad you brought this up because I had noted it and I forgot it as we're going through. But I'd like
sorry.
I want to give some statistics here. So 53% of Asian Americans, they're East Asian, they have basically college degrees. It's incredibly high. It's higher than any other like racial group. However, 46 of second generation Cambodian and Laotian Americans have high school degrees or less, compared to only 6% of second generation Chinese Americans. What I mean by these statistics and what I interpret from these statistics is that basically, if you aren't naturally good at taking the tests that this Western school system has been designed for, if you identify as Asian and you're seen as Asian, you likely will not get the support that you need and you'll be lost in the system. And that is horrible. And we can go into more details about like, the school to prison pipeline, which obviously affects Black males and Black individuals a lot more. But there are other factors that really affect Asian people.
Which I might add is the pressure to go into particular fields that clash significantly with who you are as a person. Because I've had to mentor other Asian students of mine who say they love archaeology, but their parents would never allow it. And I have to try and work them through like why they don't want to be a doctor and how they go about avoiding being a lawyer or an engineer,
And like my heart rate went up because I know a lot of friends who are Asian who like couldn't pursue their passions because of that specific reason. So much more the pressure depending on your gender and like your gender expression and all that kind of stuff. And here we've condensed all of that pain and trauma to a single disadvantage. And for a book that touts itself to be Asian, it's a whole lot of nope.
Yeah.
Shows that they didn't really have Asian voices working on this because any Asian person could have pointed out, caught this one and been like, wow, no.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. No. They might have had editors and sensitivity readers.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Even if you're an editor or sensitivity reader, you cannot make the creator, the writer, the creative director, the project manager actually act on your comments.
Yeah.
You cannot. That's why you have to know. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that. I'll just throw that out there because I'm sure they might have had an editor who pointed these things out. and just wasn't listened to, or at least that's a possibility.
Mhm.
Right? I'm sure
Also
that
a possibility with the next one.
yeah, and I'm sure there are also writers who have written things that were just like, no, we don't want this, or like, hey, change that, make that more tropey.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to read the flavor text there? I feel like we should go through this in full.
I'll read it, unless anybody else wants to. I'll do it. I got this. The crane courtier bowed deeply, a thin, insincere smile upon his face. I bring 1,000 wishes for a glorious future from the crane to the great Shinjo Arutan? Oh, God. Arutan Sarnai, the unicorn champion corrected him. The courtier bowed further. I apologize, Shinjo-sama. A lovely name, but one that falls oddly upon my tongue. It is from the Ujik tongue. It means golden rose. Altan Sarnai gestured for the courtier to join her where she was seated. We are still foreign to them, she thought, and they will never let us forget it. So type interpersonal, name, mental and interpersonal, culture, or physical appearance. Effects. The following apply to a character with the Gaijin name, culture, or appearance adversity. People of higher or equal status tend to assume that you are uneducated at best, a barbarian at worst, while people of lower status respond to you with fear. When you make a check to inspire others to do, who do not share your culture or background, oh shit. Okay. You must choose of what?
Yeah.
You're literally at battle and you're clearly the leader and you're like, let's go. GM's
like, "Oh, I don't know."
GM's like, roll to see if they listen to you.
Yeah.
Have you heard his name? I don't know.
I try to rally my troops to. Oh, I just got flashbacks to Mulan. Sorry, gotta work past that. I'm going to try to rally my troops to retreat. The GM says, roll command. No, you failed. They don't respect you enough to listen. This is stupid.
I want you to hold that fury and look at the art.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Look right at it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that's the Gaijin name, culture, or appearance. If you take this, there will always be a way that you stand out to others. There are things I don't like about this. First of all, it makes a blanket assumption. Okay, and this kind of is intertwined with the whole argument that people are like, well, this is based on Japan, and this is based on very, very, very stereotypical and often inaccurate portrayals of Japan. But also, it makes assumptions that the people of Rokugan, which is a fantasy world for fuck's sakes, the people of Rokugan all look the same. Like, homogeneity does not exist in this fantasy Rokugan because, according to the writers, all Asians look the same. And if you don't look like a certain kind of Asian, then people won't respect you or fear you. And that's fucking awful.
It's also a contradiction. Like, all Asians look the same except for some Asians. and
Except for
they're
some
separate.
Asians. It's like if you've. It's like even if you look at the different like, I don't know, this shit's bad. There are so many layers here of awful.
It's really bad.
And like
Yeah.
and many things here like, and there are things here that relate to what's happening in the real world right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I mean, we think about like what's happening in Western China with the camps. We think about the treatment of the Ainu in Japan and other ethnic minorities in
And
Japan.
There's like an exact correlate to this. We will always be foreign to them, which is the Korean descent Japanese.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
have been in Japan for generations, and yet the term used to describe them implies their foreignness, and it is not cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like,
Okay. Not to, maybe I don't know. This could be completely off, but I really don't think that we should look way too far outside the continent to look at the harm of saying that we've been here so long, but they still see us as outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how Black people are treated in the United States.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just sticking to Asia, but 100%, yeah. It's
There's nothing redeeming or
There's
there's no
nothing good
reason
about
for this
this.
to be in here.
it also
It doesn't really make sense to me.
it
But
also doesn't
also,
make sense
like,
in their own lore. It contradicts the lore. Like
yeah.
they have what 800,000 people who are in the Unicorn Clan who leave for over almost 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But I've been
and-
back for like 300.
Oh
But
my
the
god.
thing is, they come. The thing is, they come back to Rokugan, and they're like, "I'm still
motto.
Rokugani, and I have the same culture." After 1,000 fucking years, they would have the same culture, and they would adopt no customs, no names. They wouldn't intermarry. They wouldn't eat different food, develop different senses of fashion. No, there's still a fucking unicorn. Like it
The
makes no
motto.
sense to me that they have this clan of such prominence, and yet having a different culture is a disadvantage here when literally a large fraction of their population is a different culture. Or what about the Scorpion Clan? They're also, what is our definition of culture here? Because the Scorpion Clan literally does not follow one of the main cultural tenets of Rokugan, and that's
Well,
honor.
Every single clan thinks the other clans are weird. Like, that's kind of the
So then
basic
this-
thing that
this
I
doesn't
got
need to
from
be
the
here.
descriptions.
Yeah.
This doesn't
But
need to
also,
be
they
here.
chose a very particular and hard line to follow with the description of this. Like,
Mhm.
they think you're uneducated and a barbarian. So, like, whoa,
Whoa.
words
I
here.
think this was
But
basically-
also, yeah, you're
Yeah.
scary to those who are lower class. Like, there's no subtlety or options or anything happening there.
Yeah, I do not think this was thought through. I think this was thrown in there to basically, maybe to let players play as like the white guy in an Asian setting, and that's how it played out when one of the guys at my table took this. He became, and I mentioned this in our personal chat, he became Geraldo of Rivia,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
he just wandered around, a white-haired guy in Rokugan, and none of us at the table like objected to that, and it never became a thing. These mechanics were never utilized, even though he wrote it on his character sheet, because I think all of us sense that why should, if he's leading us into battle, he have to make a roll to determine whether or not we listen to him.
Exactly.
Yeah, I you know what?
I feel bad because the only thing I have to add to this, because you've all spoken some very true words that really resonate with me, is that the flavor text itself contradicts itself, because the crane courtier didn't fucking practice how to say the name. You
Yeah,
shitting me?
like, what the fuck?
I find,
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Are you shitting me?
Oh.
I find that hard to believe, so that
Oh,
makes me think it's
What about
intentional.
trade? What about
Oh,
trade? Like,
also, here's the lore thing that doesn't make sense at all. Shinjo Altasarnai is the Unicorn Clan champion.
yeah,
For somebody to not know their allies' champion's name or how to pronounce their allies' champion's name, I mean, look, Vladimir Putin looks weird to me on paper, but I know how to say Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, like,
yeah. You know what's also
Yeah.
really interesting? I don't know if any of us. I don't know if this is relevant, but it's something that I caught. I don't know if it's wrong or anything, but they really play on that stereotype of Asian people or Asian languages not having the letter L in it.
that's,
They go
right.
aru.
that's something that
Aru
I
can.
No.
yeah.
I just noticed that, and I was like, oh, so this is the first time they put an accent on someone too. They literally put an accent on somebody.
Because like when I read that, I was like, why are they? Oh no, they're mimicking a Japanese pronunciation of an L sound.
Yeah.
Cool,
Right,
great.
right.
Yeah,
But also, like, if these names have been there and they're important people, like they would already have ways of approximating. And I don't know, approximation might still bother people, but like with a language like Japanese, that's the best you're going to get for certain sounds.
yeah. No, I mean it's
You still know
it's-
that person's name, but like, Jesus. Yeah.
It's just bad.
This will
It's
forever go down as like
bad.
microaggression, the mechanic for me. It's like,
Yeah, this is like this. If just whoever edited this book and whoever just looked at this page, fucked up. There are so many layers of bad here,
And this is also
I'm like-
and it's like
outdated
well,
material
like
now
I
'cause
will
of
say
Path of
that.
Waves.
Yeah,
Right.
I will say that this
Yeah.
page is in many ways worse than a lot of what we read in Oriental Adventures. Like Oriental Adventures was like, oh yeah, there's a stereotype. Oh yeah, that's bad. This is just terrible.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. This is already when I was thinking that some of the names being given are already strange, and the way that they make other characters say names is already strange. And then they're just like, you in particular have a weird name and I can't say it. It's like, oh God. Well, like when he's like, this feels weird to say, it's like a lot of these names that you've given that are supposed to be from the area actually sound really weird when I try to say them as someone who's learning Japanese.
Yeah.
And then also when they choose to say like first name but with son or sama, I think it comes up later that someone's disrespected because they don't add a son or a sama. It's just like there are complicated unspoken ways of attaching those things to people's names as you're talking about them or with them,
but they've
or
also
to them, and that's just like all mixed up. So it's like, oh God.
But those are also like real aspects of Japanese culture that
they don't seem to understand that real aspect of Japanese
yeah.
culture. And so when they try and apply it and that idea to foreign names or strange sounding names, like it doesn't, like I'm already suspicious of their understanding of names and how Japanese people speak to each other and address each other.
I often feel a weird tension whenever like a non-Japanese person refers to someone as like with like san and sama, like when Nintendo fans call him like Miyamoto-san or like Miyamoto-sama and stuff like that, or even when people in business are like referring to, you know, made a business deal with like, you know, I don't know, Goro-san from like Tokyo, and I'm like, did you have to do that? Like I always, I don't know, maybe it's it's just the weird kind of like.
I can speak directly to working with Japanese business folk. We are still just Nick and Sarah. Like it's like that's what happens. The fact of the matter is there's a nuance there that is culturally dependent. And if you're not from that culture, you likely cannot understand that. And you shouldn't attempt that without extreme guidance.
Yeah. I think also like one other thing here is that they've taken an honorific from the Japanese language and Japanese culture, and they have stuck it into Rokugan without any explanation. Like they haven't there's no section on honorifics and how to speak to somebody in Rokugan. They just assume that you as the player are also making the assumption that this has the same rules as you see in Japanese pop culture or in Japanese, you know, culture itself proper. Right? Yeah. They make a lot of assumptions here.
Also, like if this is the actual leader of that group, even just referring to them as sama alone is disrespectful, because I'm sure they have an official title, especially if it's a military kind of setup. So it's like there's too much going on, and like maybe just use their names, or they all go by their last name with an honorific, which is more standard of a formal interaction. Like this person wouldn't even be trying to say the person's first name. Probably they could just call them like Lord, whatever their name was.
It would just be
a generic honorific.
It should. Yeah. Here's the thing. Everywhere else, every other time that this character has been mentioned, it's always been by the younger sister of the Crane Clan, which is the most recent fiction which this character appeared in. She was referred to as Shinjo-sama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna cut these out of the book.
It just should not be.
Here's the thing though. Gaijin is another one of those things that's just been around L5R forever.
Just get rid of it.
Yep, get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Never write it in something again.
Yes.
God, get rid of it.
But it's also a golden cow to some people.
Oh God.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit here.
There is.
But that being said, we've run out of time. We've run out of time. Let's end this with some positivity. That this is tough. We talked about our own personal lives. We've talked about how these things affect us, and so has the chat. Many of you in the chat have shared stories about yourselves. So we want to make sure that you folks take care of yourselves, take some time to decompress, do what you need to do to not have to think about L5R. Do we have any good news that we want to share? Anything in our lives that we'd like to talk about? Sar, go for it.
I do, and I'm trying to find it. One of the co-hosts for the for Court Games LCG, for Court Games RPG, Jeannie Calvar, she worked with a Shinto priest in training to come up with something they called renaming the gods. Basically, it's a resource that I'm going to link here to the Zoom chat for people that they can use if they want to be a little bit more respectful to in regards to religion, as well as so it is a little bit of renaming the fortunes, so they would have a fictional name, but that's still attributable to the original source material. So that is something that Jeannie Calvar had worked on. She included a lot of that. She included a section there that details the problem with the word samurai as it applies to L5R, as well as alternate terms that people can use in their games. That is really that's not too far off from the original word that's used in L5R lore, but it's different enough that it is actually respectful.
Well, look at this. There's also a section on problem tropes like Dragon Lady, which we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Model minority. Look at that.
Solid.
Solid. Let's can we put this in our Discord under the
absolutely.
Resources?
Yeah.
I feel like, Sar, since you're kind of connected to this, do you want to throw that there and we can pin it in our resources channel? Because I don't feel like we share enough there. Let's put that there. Anything else that we want to share? Steve, do you have anything? I know you have your book open, but
I have this book open, but I'm not gonna plug that. This is like my happy feel good moment to like talk later on. But my plug, horny. My plug for this is my pinup tabletop RPG calendar coming up. I'm not gonna share this out on Twitter or anything like that. But for all you who are sticking around, me and a really good friend of mine who's also a photographer who has done like Holly Wolf and some other folks who are pretty prominent in the cosplay, came to my apartment with mask on and we were safe, but took 800 boudoir shoots of me. We've narrowed it down to about 30, and I've narrowed it down to 7, which we're going to just like put a quick Photoshop filter over top and whatnot, and that'll be in a tabletop RPG calendar. I have nothing to share right now, but I got 3 shots and a daily thirst calendar. And Mahar, who I know is not in chat right now because it's early for him, but Mahar has given me his thirst seal of approval on the one preview I gave him. So that tells you a lot, I think.
Ooh.
365 days of thirst.
Yes.
There is 365 days of Steve.
Oh,
well,
God.
We could make that calendar.
Sounds of it.
We could make a merch store. We could make a Steve calendar.
It's like every day is an image, and then when you do it, it's like a flip book if you do stuff.
Mwah. Your whole year's mwah.
Just flexing.
But with my spotlight, that's a great spotlight and whatnot. But I actually want spotlight because I do care about self-care and I do care about positivity. As much as my Twitter and other like streams that I do might disagree with that, I do focus on positivity as much as I possibly can. This is a quote from So You Want to Talk About Race from Ojima Olu, which says about intersectionality. Remember, while embracing intersectionality, like this is me, like racism, ableism, sexism, it's vital for our efforts of fighting racism and other oppression. It applies to all aspects of our lives and not just movements. Who gets to speak at company meetings? Whom do you vote for? Who is your child's school curriculum developed? Who is considered when developing environmental policy? Everything we do publicly can be made inclusive and uplifting with intersectionality. And everything we do can become exclusionary and oppressive without it. Intersectionality and the recognition and confrontation of our privilege can make us better people with better lives.
That's great. Everyone should read that book. That was also brought up in our Asians Recommend stream. We still got to find a place to put that spreadsheet with all of our recommendations. I'm going to figure that out. Maybe that's going to be a Patreon thing. I don't know yet.
Let's see.
I want that publicly available, though, because I think that should be more public. We'll sort it out. Jeremy, Emma, anything else that you want to share?
Nothing major, really.
Nothing professional.
Yeah.
I have a bag of Cheetos that I'm pretty jazzed about, but like,
Yeah, I got chicken fingers downstairs that I want to eat.
Hot Cheetos?
regular, crunchy.
Emma, let's talk afterwards. I have some Frito-Lay contacts.
Oh yeah.
Wait, what? Why does Emma only get these contacts?
Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
First of all, can we get a Cheetos sponsorship? Because I will eat Cheetos on screen.
I freaking love Cheetos.
I love me some Cheetos. I know you do.
I like
Emma.
certain types of Cheetos.
The chili cheese Fritos. Chili cheese Fritos
Ooh.
are the best.
Oh, and now I want a Frito pie. Those are great.
Oh my god.
Oh, those are great.
All that stored up here. My people will talk to your people.
Steve,
Excellent.
Steve, can we get a sponsorship? Sponsorship.
Let's talk salty snacks.
Look, I'll shill for snacks. Like I'll do it. Consider this my demo reel. But I have something to share. Until tomorrow, actually, so for the next 3 hours, my itch store has a 30% off sale. Both of my Chinese monster manuals are on sale. They are 30% off or even more if you buy them together. So you can check that out at danielhquan.itch.io. I almost forgot the link to my own store. But I want to say again, like, I appreciate us being able to have these really real and raw conversations. I like Emma, I've known you for almost a decade, but you know, Sarah, Jeremy, we met this year, and Steve, I apparently have known you for a very long time, according to Jeremy. But also but also, you know, like this is tough what we do. And there are people who disagree with what we do. But I want all of you to know that what we're doing is right and needed, and you know, has immense value to both the industry, the community, and to me as somebody who gets to hear from all of you and learn from all of you. Likewise, chat, viewers on YouTube, I'm incredibly grateful for all that you've done. Yeah, maybe we'll end it there. Goodbye, everyone.